Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Chris Ostrowski. In this conversation, we talk about his transition and detransition, that is, male to female, back to male, and the various chapters of his life and struggles with identity, with Parkinson's, with degenerative diseases of various sorts, and with a search for meaning and purpose and identity. He is a wonderful man with a sharp mind and an open heart, and if you want to follow his work, links to it are down there in the description. Without further ado, here is Chris Ostrowski.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there.
What are you up
A lot
to?
going on. Ooh, just getting ready for the wife to have a baby soon. It's a couple of weeks now.
Okay. You're closing in. Final stretch here.
Yeah, final stretch.
Okay, first one.
No, my oldest is he's going to be 19 in February.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Third marriage. So
Okay.
first marriage had a kid, and yeah, second marriage no kids. And then this one we've been trying for 7 years. I mean, well, I was transgender for like six, so
Yeah.
we couldn't really get pregnant. And then once I got off the hormones, yeah, she got pregnant, and it was kind of like, whoa, okay, we can do this, I guess.
Oh,
Here we
wow.
go.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
Yeah. What's your age
Yeah.
then?
I'm gonna be 40 this year or this
Okay.
in June.
Okay, so you had a kid when you were right out of high school, middle of college.
hmm Well, I graduated when I was 16, so I was kind of floating around, going to like uh, just local university, community college, studying music and music industry and art and all that stuff. And yeah, I met this girl and we got married and had a kid. And I was just coming out of the whole Mormon thing. And so, yeah, I just had a lot of pressure to okay, well, we had sex, so now I guess we have to get married kind of
Yeah.
thing. And what a trip that was. It just ended up being the wrong person. It didn't work out, but you know,
Yeah.
yeah. So he's getting older, and so he's like kind of trying to start his own independent journey at the same time. And it just reminds me a lot of when I started mine. I'm like, oh no, you got a lot to go through, kid.
Yeah. It's tough these days. I guess it's always been rough, but
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of confusing
Different
things
though.
out there right
Different
now.
rough.
Yeah.
It's all that internet stuff they have now. So like my son went through a whole yeah, sure. I when I was a kid, I was very computer savvy. Built my first computer when I was 8 from like my dad's spare parts and things. But I had access to the internet once it was available. On dial up, the old modem sounds and everything like that.
Yeah.
But the kids now have such a flood of access to just everything. And
Stimulus.
yeah, so my son's had a little bit, he had a little bit more immersion into the whole like trying to go down a certain road of the information flood on, trying to figure things out for himself. Because I'm
Hmm.
autistic, I assume he's probably got some tendencies and he struggles with figuring out his identity in the world and things too. So I'm sure it's a little harder for him.
When did you become aware of your autism?
That was just recently. That was it 2020, 2021, 2021.
Okay.
So just, yeah, last year. Uh,
And
I was
what's the
going
what
for,
yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, continue.
Well, I was misdiagnosed bipolar when I was a kid. Like I said, I was raised LDS Mormon, and my grandma had a psychiatrist who was treating her for bipolar. It turns out she just had depression, but the medications made her like really lethargic. She couldn't be a nurse anymore. She just kind of became useless, and she was bedridden a lot of the time. And her health just declined over the years. But her psychiatrist, when I had a meltdown in class when I was in sixth grade, they took me to that psychiatrist. He also diagnosed me bipolar, put me on lithium, and it was like lithium and meds and hospitalizations and things like that as a kid. So I had this whole like sudden different realization, and I had to mask and I had to shut down. And that bipolar diagnosis kept with me for a lot of years. I told the LGBT center in Hollywood when I went there for my gender stuff. And I told them about that, and they were kind of like, "All right, well, it's managed or whatever." They didn't seem to care very much. But
Hmm.
um, as I filed for Social Security disability benefits because I was working at an urgent care in Santa Barbara and my Parkinson's was getting worse. I finally got diagnosed Parkinson's. It had been all these symptoms. So I have tremors and rigidity and bradykinesia, postural instability, things like that. So when Social Security, after 3 years of fighting them, near the end of it, they sent me to a psychiatrist, a psychologist. And they wanted to see if the bipolar affected my work abilities. And so after a long conversation and talking with him and going over my history, doing some tests and things, he determined that this is autism spectrum, not bipolar. So I didn't find out till last year. And then when that happened, it really opened my eyes. It gave me like this whole like, oh, that's what's going on here. It's not all these other things that I was trying to piece together. And oh, so it was a real, yeah, it was an epiphany moment for me.
Okay, so how does it give you clarity about your past and your present and your personhood? Whoa.
So I've always had, so a lot of people with autism spectrum, it's like you can figure a Venn diagram with like anxiety and like OCD, and there's things that autistic people have, like tendencies, and that's okay. A lot of people have tendencies. The Venn diagrams of how those are arranged are kind of, we're trying to figure that out statistically in science, but without a lot of like widespread imaging and like, without an ability to do blood tests and things like that. Obviously, diagnosis is still kind of like a signs and symptoms thing. Yeah. So when I was a kid, I mean, I escaped my house when I was like 2 years old and like ran to the park with my, Big Bird. And, I would open the fridge and leave all the food out. And I'd do all these weird things. I had like self-soothing behaviors. I'd pace a lot growing up. And, I like tap with music, all the little stuff that I was just like, oh, this is just quirky stuff. But once you get the autism diagnosis, it was like, oh, so some of this stuff is me stimming out. Some of this is me having fixations, like hyperfixations. And so that kind of fit into the gender thing. Like, oh, I've always had like a fixation with like sexuality and like human sexuality. Like I've always been really fascinated with it because I was raised Mormon and there's not really a whole lot of discussion about that growing up. Like I think my dad had like one kind of sexual talk with me growing up, and the rest of it was like, what's circumcision and why am I fixating on like my body and like what's all this other stuff. And so it all kind of bled together. As a kid, I used to ride in the desert a lot on my bicycle and things like that, and find magazines and things like that. And they'd have little, sexual reassignment surgery stuff in the back, all obscure. And because all that stuff was just, the 90s was just kind of starting to get all that stuff. They were trying to figure out transsexualism for the most part. And the W path, I think around that time was just coming out of like the 80s. I think they developed all their surgical techniques for like vaginoplasty and things. In the 90s, they were trying to push more like plastic surgery kind of stuff. We can see the addiction that's caused in society. Obviously we've all seen like plastic surgery addiction, things like that. So for me, when I got the autism diagnosis, it was like, oh, here's why I'm fixated. Here's why I'm obsessed about certain things. Here's why I'm compelled to do certain things, to have certain routines.
Okay.
So that gave me clarity in that way.
Could you expand on stemming out? What does that mean?
Well, as far as I understand it, I mean, it's kind of like a slang term, almost like people use, but fidgeting, stuff like that.
Okay.
Just getting fixated on stuff, stirring something too many times, just like cleaning something a little obsessively, that kind of stuff. Repetitive neurological tics almost. It's almost like a Tourette's.
Okay.
At that point.
And what about interpersonal dynamics, reading people, teenage years, figuring out how girls and boys move through the world and talk to each other?
I found that very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, so growing up, I was raised Mormon from two parents who were also raised Mormon from birth, all of us.
Okay. How far does that go back, your family?
There's some roots that are pretty far back, but it's kind of off and on. We've done our genealogy and history and things like that. So there are some bigger figures back, but yeah, for us, it's just been probably 2 or 3 generations, maybe two. My grandma's, on my mom's side, they converted from Catholicism. And my grandpa was a twin who went to Catholic military school, so his experience was a little different. But on my dad's side, yeah, LDS, LDS.
Okay.
Um, so growing up, I mean, both of my family, we had this like super routine. We had this super routine. It was like we had activities to go to pretty much every week. We had a Sunday, thing that we went to. We had classes while we were there. All of our friends were there, and school was almost like secondary. School's like you'd go to school and you'd be in the world, but not of it.
Yeah.
Because you'd have this whole other world that was your actual family, your actual ward, that sort of thing. And so growing up, I think as I became more involved in school and I was more in like elementary and started getting to high school and that kind of thing, I found it very difficult to have interpersonal relationships. I found it easy to mask and like to sort of get on the same page with somebody for a little bit, but after a while, I'd like shut down on certain topics, or people just think I'm odd. That led to some of when I was in sixth grade having that kind of meltdown. In fifth grade, I tested at a 12th grade level, and that's when they decided to skip me a grade. But at that same time, so fifth grade, I had this testing and everything went great, but I was also having these interpersonal relationships or these interpersonal problems with other students. I wanted to do the math in my head. Why would I need to write down all these steps? I already got it. And so then the teacher would, I'd finish first, and the teacher would come over and tell me I was not putting all the steps in, and I'd get upset, and then the neighbor would he'd finish, and then he'd get praised for it, and I had this like dissonance about it. And then in sixth grade, I had all this disconnect from everybody, and it finally led to this place where my teacher was putting me like off to the side and like behind a barrier, so the whole class couldn't like see me, so I couldn't be a disruption. I couldn't talk to my neighbor or something, and then I snapped one day, and I was like, this is unfair. I don't feel like this is right. And jarred my table around, and I was upset. I had a meltdown. And it was after that I got diagnosed. And then after that, yeah, there was no real being able to connect and relate with other people. I had been in a mental hospital seeing kids strapped down to a table with a, straitjacket being injected, and I'm like, my worldview was shocked.
Oh.
It totally shifted from everything that I had grown up with. And there was a chasm that split. So when I was 18, my dad kicked me out and we went our separate ways.
Oh.
I had to figure out how to live on my own, and went to go live with my grandma because she was my maternal grandma. She was willing to help. And spent a lot of time just searching around, which is why I think when I started going to community college, I got sort of pulled into a relationship that I wasn't ready for, and because I just was floating around, didn't really have any support or structure.
What about brothers, sisters, big family, small family, no family?
Yeah, so my mom had six. Well, my grandma on my mom's side, she had six kids. So on that side is big. And my dad's mom, she had three. My parents had one, and
Just you.
two, me and my sister. So my sister's 2 years younger than me, and yeah, I only have the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you able to navigate that with your sister, like somebody close to your age, and like understanding that, mapping out that dynamic?
Kind of. I was on lithium a lot. From
What
like
did
10 to
lithium do for you?
well, for me, it caused me a great deal of stress. For one, like it gave me like stomach ulcers, and so every time I took it, I was nauseous. I would be on the floor, I'd be in pain, I'd be vomiting, I had to take a lot of antacids. So in addition to being autistic and stressed out and like trying to navigate the world I was in, I was also dealing with this other element of like being slowly poisoned. Is kind of what it felt like to me. And my parents were very adamant about me taking it, and it got to points where they were like willing to like put hot sauce in my mouth and like you're not getting water until you take the pill kind of thing. Didn't happen a lot, but it did happen. And so it was a real stress. So the situation with my sister and me became kind of split too, kind of became a little off and on, because like, yeah, we could get along sometimes, but I always felt like she was being treated very differently than me. I felt like my experience was somehow poisoned and wrong, and her experience was being kind of glorified and everything. Maybe that led to some of the gender stuff too. Who knows? I mean, like I could psychoanalyze that and say, maybe I just felt like my gender wasn't being like, didn't have any respect or something. But I also grew up in a very patriarchal society where, I don't know, maybe that's not the case.
So you were academically on point or even ahead of the curve. And so you're hyper intelligent, very quick study kind of stuff. What would you geek out about? I guess you built a computer out of spare parts.
Yeah, I did that. I used to, love the adventure games. I was the kid with the encyclopedias all around. So I'd go to my grandma's house. She had the old Britannicas
Yeah.
in the 80s, and
Okay.
my mom bought the book of knowledge. And so I was the kid with all the books around me, cross-referencing everything, trying to figure out how the world works.
Okay.
Physics, science, things like that. I used to draw like a lot of DeLoreans, because that was just the time, a lot of interesting, like, black holes, wormholes. But, a lot of my papers, when I was even a teenager, there were like a lot of them were on nuclear energy. And I'd have all the diagrams out and all the uranium 235, 238 and everything. So that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. Hypnosis a lot too. A lot of hypnosis. I used to hypnotize my friends and stuff. And went to private school for a little bit. But yeah, that kind of stuff. Psych, medicine, science, physics.
Yeah. And so when your father kicks you out, do you have any direction or ambition when you're 18? You're going out of the world, like I want to be the next Oppenheimer or something.
Right, right. It was a bit of a shock because between like I was diagnosed bipolar at 10, and they started medicating me to a point. When I became 16, my dad got called to go live in Japan because he works for Disney Imagineering. So he's an Imagineer. He programs robots and he programs all those shows, pirates, all the robots, everything. Which was a great thing growing up. So I became interested in robots and things like that growing up. Got to have some time at Disney, which was great. When he lived in Florida, I was with him on the Timekeeper show. So it's Robin Williams' voice with a robot, and they're like a Circle Vision 9i, robotic, and you get to go through with H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and stuff like that. And so that's fun. I had some good experiences like that. But when I was 16, he got called to Japan, and my mom thought it would be best if I went to go live with my aunt and go to college because I was already graduated by that point. I took the California proficiency exam, and I was already a year ahead, so I wasn't age-wise eligible for it, but I was a junior when I was 16, so I was allowed to take it. And I passed, and then I didn't go with them to Japan for a little while. Went to Arizona, kind of tried to find my own way, worked at Outback Steakhouse, and I just tried to do my own thing for the bit, but I was floating around and I was trying to experiment with a little bit of drugs and things like that as much as I could get as, I wasn't old enough or anything like that to do anything. But I did go to Japan with them eventually because my aunt kicked me out and I went to another aunt's house in Arizona and I was trying to do that. But I went to Japan. And when we came back, it was basically like, no, you're still going to church and you're still going to have to take meds if you live in my house. And you got to follow like these curfew and like, time off the internet and stuff. And I was trying to talk to my girlfriend and have a whole other thing going on. I was like, no, this is just not going to work. And
Yeah.
he kept encroaching on my space. And I had another meltdown and flipped out and he felt like he was in danger. So he just was like, nah, you're gone. And I was like, so I lived in my van for a little bit, went to the homeless shelter, went to my grandma's to just park the car. And she was just like, get inside and come have some breakfast. Like, we got a room. Don't worry. Grandpa left some money for you on the thing there. And, so you can get some lunch today and just come inside and keep going to school. And so they were really supportive. This is right around the time like 9/11 happened when I was living with them. And then, yeah, I met my first wife at college there.
What did your future look like to you?
I didn't really know. I didn't really know. At that point, I wasn't thinking about college at all. I didn't think I wanted to go to college. I was pretty good with computers, but I think mostly I wanted to like start a music company, production company, something to do with music because I've always been fascinated with music. I started out with like I think it was piano, clarinet, and then violin, and then guitar, and then I later picked up the drums and bass, and I really loved production. And so when I met my first wife, that's kind of the direction I was trying to go. I was doing guitar recitals, trying to learn classical pieces and stuff like that. So I thought I'd go, be this music music person because that was my interest, that was my fixation, that was the biggest one. Uh, and I don't know, it's a tough business to get into, especially back then. there was no like royalties were a little harder to come by. It wasn't like you just sign up with somebody and put it on Spotify. Things were a little more difficult back then.
Yeah. So, but you made your way.
Not quite. After my first marriage, like I started working at Guitar Center, and so I was doing pro audio there. But it started to lean more into the live production aspect.
Yeah.
I was helping people set up studios, sure, but then once my first wife and I split, I found myself doing like freelance live engineering, so front of house, back of house for like just like Christian band festivals. One of them ended up being a Pride festival, which was my first real experience at like a Pride festival. And I was there with my second wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, but we were just dating and everything. But yeah, we were together and we went, and I just was like, I was surrounded by like trans people and gay people, and I was just like, oh, this is different. This is so different. Interesting. Okay. And I kind of like put it on hold. And I had a friend who was at Guitar Center who was also, I found out, was trying to transition. And I was like, I remember just being like fixated and fascinated on the thing, and I went to Pride and kind of forgot about it. And then I went to Pride the next year, and it just kind of sunk in a little more. And then it was just all this affirmation and all this positivity and acceptance of just everything. But it wasn't the only uh, aspect really. But by that point, when I was with my second wife, I decided to go to school to go do X-ray. So I became an X-ray tech and medical assistant, and that's when I started really finding out that my back was getting destroyed. I was still kind of working as in a warehouse, and then I got my X-ray license, and I hurt myself in the warehouse at Guitar Center, and it just got worse and worse, and it never really healed. And so I started dealing with disability problems, chronic pain, during my second marriage. And that really derailed a lot of what I was trying to do. But then I was like, oh, I'm going to still try to go to college. So I finished my X-ray program, got my license, and then I enrolled into a bachelor's degree in physics and teaching. I was like, I'll go be a physics teacher. That'll be great. Science. I love it. Started doing the program, was really excelling. They put me into honors. It's like Kappa Delta Pi, which is like, they're like, this is the same honor society as Einstein. And I'm like, cool. I don't know if that helps, but that's great. Because I just did so many courses at once. I think I did like, I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 semesters worse in one semester at WGU because it's all online. So I just flew through it. Because I knew it. I was like, all right, this is fun. So I was thinking I'd go be a physics teacher. Second wife and I had a really long breakup, probably over a year. During that time, my mom died. My mom's dad died. They both died of cancer. She died of stage 4. He died of stage 3. And that was like a brutal hit. And then around that time, I started like trying to take like birth control pills. And my wife and I were kind of distancing a little bit, and I felt like coming out as bi because I had all these feelings, and growing up. And one of my first sexual experiences was actually with another boy, and over in the church, like we'd stolen a porno mag and went back to his house, and ended up touching each other, and it was like I didn't even really process all that until way later into that period. I was like, well, I got all these other weird unresolved things, and everything started to come out. So I felt like I had to deal with it. So I told my wife at the time, and it really broke us up. And like I said, my mom died and everything, and I was really floating around. My son was getting further distant. I was living in San Pedro, which is down in California, near Long Beach, basically. And I was working in Rancho Palos Verdes as an X-ray tech. I was just like by myself. I was just alone, and I was suicidal. I wasn't feeling great, and it kind of all came back to me. And the person I knew from Guitar Center and all these other things, and I'm like, maybe this is trans. Maybe this is this. But I think the crucial point was that the APA had just changed the DSM. And it had gone from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. It was like no longer really pathologic. It was kind of like, well, we have a therapy for this now. And at the time I was shifting my degree because I was feeling like, well, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to be trans, I don't want to have kids asking me what's going on with me in a classroom. That feels inappropriate. It really does. And so I kind of shifted my degree. And I was like, well, why don't I just put this degree on hold, and I'll go do some like I'll do more like biopsychological and biology and physiology, and I'll try to go pre med. So I started going that direction. I started studying for the MCAT, took the MCAT. I wasn't finished with my degree yet, but I figured I'd go ahead and apply to med school. So I applied to a couple of med schools in California, and I was like, this is the path I want to go. So I was really feeling like going like, to be a doctor, a surgeon would be the way to go. But like I said, I was having chronic pain and stuff like that, and all these other psychological issues going on. And it's like when I went to the LGBT center, it was like, well, we can focus on that. What are your goals? Like all this other stuff. Yeah, yeah, we'll deal with maybe some of it, but with this, oh wow, you got that. We can give you hormones.
Why did you go to the LGBT lounge
Yeah,
center?
yeah. They were like the only ones at the time. This was 2014, so
Where at?
they were like
In San Pedro, you said? Or
this was in
no, no.
Hollywood. The LGBT centers in Hollywood.
Okay.
That's where they have all the doctors and the whole center, and yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a 3 or 4 story building. But I went there. I talked to the lead, who is it, the therapist, the lead therapist, for like 10 minutes, and I was like, yeah, I had these feelings, and I feel like I'm a woman, and I've always been more feminine and more like at home, and I just I just feel more feminine than masculine. And they were more than happy to just, okay, well, that's cool, and then we'll give you to the doctor, and the doctor's basically like, okay, well, you have this, so this is what we usually start on, and it was that easy. It was like
Okay.
15 minutes with a therapist, and then just go to the doctor to get your stuff and go downstairs to get your hormones.
Yeah. D- during this during this time, you're undergoing a lot of changes, a lot of emotional difficulties. It sounds like you haven't really found yourself too. It sounds like, and I don't mean to interpret your life for you, but just to kind of speak it in my own words, like you're going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, just career wise. And a sense of identity tied to it isn't stabilizing into a home life because the different relationships. Do you have you lose your parents, you lose a long time relationship? Do you have somebody like a therapist or a pastor or a mentor that's able to just help you process all these different things?
During that whole time, not really, no. It was like psychotherapy is really just kind of like it almost felt more optional, especially after the experience I had as a kid. Like, here, go to all these psychiatrists who are going to put you on all these horrible medications that destroy your body. Like, I was kind of averse to that,
Hmm.
and there was no real requirements for that to get hormones and things like that. And you're right, there is a lot of that whole jumping around. So I've moved over 50 times in my life. There's just no traction. Like without a certain level of multi-generational support, there was just no way to get any traction. So I feel like I've always been, one step forward, 2 steps back.
Hmm.
I was talking with a therapist recently, Stephanie Wynn, and she was saying it's kind of like Sisyphus, rolling the rock up the hill, and it's cursed to have the rock go back down and have to keep pushing it upward. It's always kind of felt like that. But throughout it all, I did release a couple of albums. I did have some music. I do have some up on Spotify. I have tried to put together some. I've always tried to do a little vlogging and stuff like that. So I guess in some way, I've always wanted to connect with people. I've always been interested in psychology and people, and now that's kind of materializing into, well, I've been through this experience, and now there's all these other people who are hurting who are also going through this experience. And wow, it's like a real moral imperative to like speak up and connect with some of these people and talk about detransitioning and talk about the experience, because I feel like I've learned something along the way. And I
Hmm.
feel like I've learned something about the medical field. It's like, for me, finding out that I was autism spectrum and understanding how my OCD fit into it, it really like turned on a light bulb. Like, all of gender dysphoria is OCD. And it's not really a popular opinion right now, but it's like if you look at the criteria for OCD, it is OCD. Sexual dysmorphia is what I call it. because they took the term dysphoria kind of from like almost like Tumblr, from almost like the WPATH
Hmm.
is doing with the Unic archives now. They're just like, oh yeah, we found this like archive and we're like kind of adopting the language because we have some people in there. Like, well, it was almost the same kind of thing with like Tumblr and all that. And so dysmorphia fits, eating disorder, integrity identity disorder. It's all the same. It's all obsession. It's all an obsession over your physical perception. It's a perception disorder.
Hmm.
And so I think the way that the DSM is organized is a little misleading. I think they separated it and they kind of gave it its own space, but the treatments aren't identical. If you look at the treatments for eating disorders versus OCD versus gender dysphoria, you're going to see two that are the same and one that isn't.
Hmm.
These two are going to say medication management for stress management and building new coping mechanisms through cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the treatment. Avoid your triggers, help the patient. But with dysphoria, it's indulge the triggers and go all the way. And so with OCD, there's like what I came to like dig into is like there's ego dystonic behaviors and ego syntonic behaviors. Ego dystonic ones are ones that go against your personality. Like if you have to wash your hands a million times and you're hiding it from your family, you feel shame about that. It goes against your ego. You don't want it there. And so you have shame about it. A lot of people with OCD have things like that where the stuff they do, they try to hide it. Hoarders try to hide it a lot of times. But then you have like the more narcissistic side when they've indulged, when they've cohesed it with their personality, then it's like ego syntonic. It's part of their ego. Like, this is the way I am. This is how it is. You have to work around me. It becomes people with like antisocial personality disorder and stuff, sociopaths, psychopaths, they all have that kind of leaning to their
Hmm.
psyche. And so for me, it was like, wow, the APA, when they changed it, they really took something ego dystonic and they sort of pulled it out of the closet and put it out there and made everybody deal with it. They made it ego syntonic. They created a scaffold to do that. And so it was like the W path that really created that scaffold and lobbied for that scaffold year after year.
Hmm. And
And
you
that's
climbed
what
that
blows my
scaffold.
mind. I'm sorry?
You climbed that scaffold. You walked up to that scaffold. And they invited you and they gave you an elevator. Like, here we go.
Yeah, it was like getting a gold pass up the elevator. Yeah, exactly. Here's your fob. Go on up.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what it was. Then I started looking into other studies as I started detransitioning and other like narrative reviews. And I came across one that was in the National Institutes of Health, and I put it up on my Twitter and everything. But they were talking even then to 2018 how it was methodologically incorrect. The APA used low quality studies to make that change. The studies were based on gender nonconforming, not on transsexuals. And this was in the DSM 4 to 5, which was interesting because they also go into it that the DSM 3 had committed. Okay, this is the DSM 3. Everything from here and beyond is going to be high quality studies only. We're committing to that. That's the APA. But then here comes gender dysphoria, and the WPATH is like, well, you can kind of circumvent that. And the purpose of doing that is really to get the insurance to cover it based on a risk versus benefit model. And that has become well, they're going to kill themselves if they don't do it. It's
Oh,
suicidality.
okay. Yeah, that's
That's
interesting.
how that
Okay.
all fits in.
That's a really good point because I've seen that and argued against it rhetorically, but it fits perfectly into a statistically driven cost benefit reward model medical things. Like, okay, 40%, 30%, 1%, all these percentiles are being thrown around because it ties into the money. Ties into
Right. It's suicidality. And that's the whole thing. Suicidality, I know from a psychological, I take a lot of psychology courses and I've studied up on my own about all that stuff. But there's suicidality in a lot of things, a lot of disorders, and we don't affirm them all. Uh, and so that kind of blew my mind that that's all it took, really, it was just like, well, this is causing, a lot of emotional distress. Okay, there you go.
So during that fast track, you were kind of like, wait, what? Or were you kind of just,
Well,
let's go?
I was kind of like, let's go at the time. I was suicidal at the time. I was going through a lot of stress. I just lost two prominent family members who glued my family together. After they died, the whole family scattered apart. I lost contact with everybody pretty much. The interactions I have now are few and far between. I don't really have any family for the most part. So yeah, I was all gung ho about it at the time because I just thought, well, here we go. I can do this. I can, and I think that there's an element of destroying the old self, destroying your past, and starting
Mm.
over. Reinventing yourself. There's always that's a human thing. That's a human drive to reinvent
It's a
yourself and to
California thing,
overcome
that's for
stuff.
sure.
That's true too. But the thing that blew my mind was like, yeah, they required like 6 months of hormones in order to get a letter to change my legal information. Okay, that's they had like a little bit of time frame for that, but 6 months isn't really a lot. And then it was like a year or something like that, or like 9 months to get a letter for breast surgery. And that was interesting because it was the surgery for breast surgery and for SRS because I was planning on going through both of those. And that's all based on an informed consent model that's sort of left over from plastic surgery from the 80s and 90s. It's kind of like, well, you know what's best for yourself, so we're just going to do it. But in the 80s, it was really about reconstruction. Plastic surgery was about cleft lips and vaginal mutilation and repairing people, fixing people. And that turned into, well, we could just kind of sign away anything and we can augment and everything. And so the head of the W path during the 80s was a surgeon. So of course he's going to look for a surgical solution. And that's when they developed all the surgical techniques for vaginoplasty and all that kind of stuff. They were trying to experiment on that, trying to affirm this. And so I kind of see the whole plastic surgery informed consent model as one part of the scaffold that they were like, okay, well, you just got to sign it away and there's no screening. Like we've seen lots of people in society who are mentally ill getting obsessive addictive surgeries, tons of Botox, tons of procedures, 60 procedures, 30 procedures. It's just, it's unchecked. There's no due diligence. There's no safety. And so one can argue, yeah, well, they're adults. Okay, they're adults. But right now it's happening to kids with the gender thing. And so that kind of like, okay, well, that's an issue. And the other part of it is, well, even adults who are vulnerable need to have some safeguards. There needs to be some due diligence by the medical profession. And there's just not.
Hmm.
So they were willing to scaffold everything and just put it all into place, get the insurance approved, do the informed consent, not have to require the psychotherapy, and just push me through.
Okay.
I was more than
So,
willing to.
what was your, how did you approach becoming this other person? Did you have like, you get to select a name? You have to start thinking about like how you're walking, how you take up space. So there's a lot of like extra nooks and crannies to be obsessed about in every waking moment of your life. So how did the becoming a woman unfold for you?
I think it's kind of like you said. You just lean into that obsession. You completely lean in. So there were some nights I was pulling hairs out of my face one at a time for 5 hours. Just totally zonked out in front of a mirror, just like, wow. And I'm on medications at this time. I'm going through pain. I'm having pain problems. So occasionally I have Tramadol, Norco. There's muscle relaxers. There's Valium. I used to be on Seroquel when I first came out. As like there was a lot of medications that were like, along with trying cocaine along the way. And, there was ketamine at one point that I tried. It was like, the ketamine was interesting because it's like, they're showing signs of like it being useful with medication resistant depression. And I
Hmm.
can kind of attest to that. Like it did. It was like, oh, cool. Wow, no depression. That's interesting. I don't think that was the healthiest thing for me to do at the time because I didn't really need like 100% affirmation in this whole like gender thing. And that's kind of, I think, what happened is I reached a point where I lost my inhibition about it. I was like, you know what? I'm perfectly fine like this, living in my own delusion. And I think that's part of it is some of it's leaning into the obsession. Some of it was, picking out a name. Some of it's just trying to be recognized as it. So a lot of time when I was early on, I was just keep feminizing my dress and mannerisms until I would just get she out in public. And I was like, well, there we go. Now I'm passing. So it was looking for milestones, and that's
Hmm.
kind of, I think, part of the problem is with this whole thing is like, well, we can see with kids, if they start puberty blockers, there's like what 90% chance that they're going to continue on with hormones. That's what they're showing. It's kind of the same thing. Like I started the process, and before you know it, I was getting like 70 hours of electrolysis covered by insurance for my face and groin. I was getting, breast surgery. Uh, and it was just like, yeah, there was a lot of obsession and looking for milestones. Like, what's next? Like, what's the next procedure? Is it a blepharoplasty? Is it Botox? Is it facial feminization surgery? Like, how much hair can I get rid of? Like, should I fix my eyebrows? Should I change my hairline? Should I get rid of my tattoos? Should I soften my skin? Should I do any? It just goes on and on and on. And for somebody who was impoverished and jumping around a lot, it became very clear at some point after I lost my health insurance. It was like, oh shit, this is only for people who have money. Okay. Wow. So this is just like every other thing in society. It's just class. Like, it's just like you can get the Lamborghini or you can get the car that drives around town. Like, you can change your whole body or you can drive the one you have. Like, at some point you have to like sacrifice yourself for some dream to live some dream, or you have to accept what your reality is. And I had to accept my reality at some point because I couldn't fight it with the Parkinson's. I couldn't keep maintaining this obsession. And that's, I think, was the biggest part. I just physically and emotionally couldn't keep maintaining it.
Could you give a brief on Parkinson's? What is that, and what is that to you?
Parkinson's.
Yeah. Is it a
Mm.
neurological or?
It is. So when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I was already having symptoms for like 8 years, and I'll get into kind of what they were. But um, uh, I finally ended up going to Cedars-Sinai in Beverly Hills to the Movement Disorder Clinic. And they did, at the time I was insured with my Santa Barbara insurance at the urgent care. So I got a $10,000 brain scan, which was a DAT scan. And so they basically inject radioisotopes that are connected to dopamine into your brain. And those are supposed to attach to dopamine receptors in the putamen of your brain. If they attach and you show perfect activity, you don't have Parkinson's. But if there's missing areas, it means those receptors are destroyed. And if the receptors are destroyed in that area, it's a strong indication of Parkinson's. And so that was the final thing that diagnosed me. But before, for those 8 years, I had been having progressive rigidity. And there's four. There's rigidity, bradykinesia, postural instability, and tremors. So when I was working at urgent care in Palos Verdes, I was like noticing the tremors while I was trying to do blood draws. And I'm like, okay, this isn't good. I wonder what this is. Maybe it's essential tremor. So the doctor gave me propranolol, which is a beta blocker. It slows down your heart a little bit, tends to decrease tremors for resting tremors, but not for intention tremors. It maybe kind of worked, but not really. I was on a lot of other meds at the time, but I was having the rigidity in my neck. I thought, well, maybe my neck is having problems. Maybe all these herniations. I was having herniations because I have degenerative disc disease. So I've been getting a lot of x-rays, and I had herniations in my back and neck. And they were progressing and getting worse. And when I started the estrogen and my hormones were kind of flipping, one of the doctors was like, well, you're developing some osteoporosis. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Like, what am I, 34 at that point, 33, 32? I'm like, that's not usual. I shouldn't be aging that much. Kept on with the hormones. My leg wouldn't come with me. I'd like go to turn and my leg would just stay stuck. So I can't trip over my leg. I have no more balance really backwards. I tend to lose my balance backwards. And the bradykinesia, yeah, just like sometimes just feeling like my limbs are really slow or I can't pull them with me. In addition to that, I was having swallowing problems. My epiglottis doesn't work properly. So when you swallow, it covers up your airway so it doesn't go down. Mine doesn't work when I eat. So it just doesn't close. So there's a risk of aspirating food and everything, getting sick from that. I didn't find that out until like 2019 when I did a swallow study. And that's when they also did a physical exam, and they were like, your right side is like an 89-year-old as far as strength and weakness, and your left side is a little older. So there's this real concern that like going on hormones like kind of furthered that process along somehow, that it somehow worsened my health and caused some premature aging. But how can you point to the biochemical, process that caused that? And that's kind of the out they have. Well, you signed for it. There's your informed consent. Mm-hmm. So it's not like they don't really have any control over the health of these people. And I think that comes from just the way the medical field's set up. Being in the medical field and still being an X-ray tech since 2008, like there's a real lack of what usually happens is you go to the doctor and you have to kind of argue with the doctor about what your problem is. And maybe they'll help you out, or maybe they'll give you a kind of a stopgap. But what I think we need further in the future is a multimodal approach. So you have all the specialists in one room and the patient in the middle of the room, and the doctors have to argue with each other about what's going on and not with the patient. So the patient can actually get the care they need, because the patient's not really in a position to know everything they need to know about everything to approach their health with, and then, any kind of information. Like, how can you have informed consent if you don't have the knowledge to know what's going on, really?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what's happening.
Hmm. What was your reaction to the estrogen and the blocking of your testosterone? Did you go emo?
Pretty standard stuff.
Crying during
Well,
insurance commercials?
a little bit, yeah. Well, so here's the thing. So as far as best as I can tell, there's kind of two aspects of what, like, how male and female brains are different. There's one aspect that's just purely psychological. Like, I think Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot too. He says, men are more focused on things and women are more focused on people. Well, I think that plays out, sure. But on the bio side, as best I can find, the corpus callosum, which is the tissue that runs down both hemispheres of the brain, is a little bit more dense in women. So when I started taking estrogen within the first 6 months, yeah, okay, so I had my smell was changing, my body odor was changing. I was having some atrophy in my testicles. I was having my dreams were a little bit different. I felt like I was thinking more comprehensively in some way, more like, it wasn't just like, oh, this is this, this is this, this is this. It was like, this is this, and how do I feel about that? This is this, and how do I feel about that? And I had to incorporate a few more elements. Maybe that's purely subjective, but that's kind of what I felt like psychologically I was going through.
Yeah. Typically, one way that I've heard autism being spoken about is it's a hypermasculine mindscape where things are very not well integrated. There's a lot of disconnections, a lot of like centralizations, and not a lot of holistic mind thing. That's one way that I recall hearing about it. So I wonder if getting on testosterone and starting to feel more connected or more holistic with information, if that actually felt good for you, or was kind of therapeutic with regard to the autistic side of things. If you were able to read people more, have a little bit more intuition, understanding of different situations that before had frustrated you, or you had to do a lot of extra processing to decode human beings or something like that.
I think that's a fascinating point to bring up, actually. Like, looking retrospectively now, yeah, I think maybe in one way I felt like I could emotionally connect more with what all these logical things were. I know when I met my wife now, it was 2017, 2016, 2015, 2016. I'm so bad with dates. But I met her in like 2016. I
Yeah.
always had a problem with timeline. That's why I had a problem piecing my whole life together up until recently. I had to kind of take a long time to piece all the memories together because everything was so scattered and broken apart. Going through estrogen helped me understand, and this is going to sound kind of crazy and maybe almost a little offensive to women, but it helped me understand the female experience a little bit more. I don't mean that to be offensive to women. It was just like, when I met my wife and she started telling me about all the trauma and stuff that had gone in her life, all the sexual assaults and losing a baby to abuse and like all kinds of other stuff, just abuses since she was like 4 and kidnapping, things like that. Like, I felt like after all the estrogen, I was way more willing to accept that, like, wow, women have a lot harder time than men generally, statistically, in a lot of ways. So going through the process definitely made me a little more empathetic. But at some point it became like, wow, I feel like I'm encroaching on like this, like, a women's only space, because I was using female restrooms. And what was worse was when I was working in Santa Barbara, I was in a really tough position. I had legally changed my stuff to female. And that put me in a position where when it came to supervised drug screens or like them needing to call on for like a chaperone for a procedure, like, oh, we're gonna do a thing, so we need a female in the room. Like they were calling on me to do this, and I was like in a position where I kind of had to do it. I really couldn't protest. It was my job, and there was nobody else at times, and so I would avoid it as much as I could. And I told them I was uncomfortable with it, but you're legally female, and you're the one who has to be in there. So it put me in a really terrible spot where I felt like I was doing something wrong, and I was. I was in a bad spot, and I couldn't really process how to get out of that spot. So when my Parkinson's got bad enough to where I had to quit and file for SSI, which I never actually got because they were like, "Oh, you're just young, you can go fold laundry." I'm like, yeah, okay, you guys don't get this. Um, it was almost welcome because I was able to get out of the situation. I was able to stop doing that, and yeah, eventually I just was like, I don't feel comfortable going in women's restrooms. I don't feel comfortable, even though I have breasts and everything. And usually I just put on a coat or hide as best as I can. But yeah, it's I feel like they've taken all the women's spaces away. And then Leah Thomas happened, and I'm like, this isn't right. And JK started getting pushed back just for talking about women having trauma and needing to be able to talk about their experience clearly. And with my wife having to deal with that, I'm like, no, you can't stop women from talking about their experiences, and then trans women want to be called just women. I'm like, okay, this is all just it imploded. The house of cards fell, but it fell over a little bit at a time.
Did you ever, on a psychological level, feel like you were violating the category of woman, like that there was you're entering into a holy of holies kind of thing, like on a psychological level, on a mapping level? Is there ever dysphoria in that, or dysmorphia in that?
Well, I do think so. I felt like, well, I never really got along with the guys, not all the way. And women always seem to have like, yeah, maybe there is an element of like seeing them as almost like the more advanced version, the more advanced sex. And in many ways they are, and that's okay. I can accept that now as a man. And be like, actually, I respect that. That's cool. You guys got this. Like, you guys don't need a man to explain how to be a woman. That's just absurd. They do it better. And there came a point when I did like 3 consultations for sexual reassignment surgery. Okay. I had 70 hours of electrolysis on my face and groin. That was grueling to go through. One hair at a time.
Yeah.
But going through those procedures...
I want to avoid the euphemism of SRS, or sexual reassignment surgery. This is castration. Kind of, yeah. This is castration, and then the installation of a continually opening wound.
Right. I agree with that. Like, kind of changing the nomenclature is important. But yeah, doing the consultations for what used to be called that, but it's definitely genital mutilation. Based on an informed consent model. I kept thinking to myself, from a scientific standpoint, why aren't they creating vaginal cells and doing stem cells and making a scaffold and then implanting? And then it got to a point where, like, even if they were doing all of that, and even if I had all that, and they implanted a uterus, and that doesn't take away the experience that I was raised as a boy. And women have it different. Girls and women have it different. They're more sexualized by men. They're more abused. They're more at risk for violence. There's all these things that are real things, and we can't erase that. If we turn a blind eye to it, it really isn't good for any of us. So
while you were in the consultation, were you you said there was a feeling of like, Did you feel that your care at that level, which is probably one of the most extreme things you could do? I guess you could do clavicle surgery, but the SRS, the groin surgery, is pretty intense, and that's irrevocable, and that's a lifelong. Talk about a Ferrari. I mean, you really need to take care of that thing when you get one.
Well, and I was, like I said, I wanted to go be a surgeon, so I read the books on the procedures.
Okay.
Every single book, I saw every procedure I could. I dug for that information.
Were they rigorous enough, these consultants?
No. The fact that they couldn't find my autism, the fact that they didn't address my bipolar, the fact that they didn't care about the OCD, the fact that I had a laundry list of medications and none of those things were really talked about more than just kind of superficially. I mean, being in the medical field, having worked with dozens of doctors, it's just not enough. It's just not even close to enough. And that was kind of where I determined that it was like, okay, you guys are just practicing medicine. This is a practice. You guys are playing games. And it's all being kind of directed by WPATH because they're the ones who wanted to take anything sexually deviant and start making it pernicious in society, normalizing it. And now they're trying to normalize what is kind of the beginnings of like, yeah, child mutilation, castration, child, they're trying to, I mean, you could tell, you could see the direction. They're trying to get pedophilic. They're trying to approve this stuff. They're trying to make, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to make bestiality like next. You know what I mean? Like they're getting to the point where they're just trying to normalize everything. But they're ignoring that we've evolved this way as humans for a very long time and disrupting our like social recognition, disrupting our bodies. It doesn't mean more happiness. It generally means less. Unless you do a bunch of plastic surgery, you're not going to be more happy. Like you're just going to be more fixated on your body. And maybe sometimes it works, if the person's healthy, if there was enough mental screening and they're clear of everything else and a psychologist says they're okay, but who has the money to spend on that? Where's that money going to come from? There's no requirements for it. So they're like, insurance doesn't really require it. They're not going to force anybody to do this stuff, to go through comorbidity screening, search for a differential diagnosis, and treat it first before they're just like, well, easy fix.
Well, returning to the cost benefit, I can see a world where detransitioners, where a generation is seen as cannon fodder for this discombobulated conception of gender, wrapping on the doors of the insurance companies hard enough with enough legal will that the insurance company's like, no, we're not paying for this anymore. This is too expensive. And then they change. And then everybody kind of just sweeps it under the rug. I can see that happening. That's one vector of changing it.
Yeah. I think once the once the APA and the AMA stop pushing back on misinformation about it, and do their systematic review. And I know you spoke with I forgot her name.
All of them.
Yeah, you speak with a lot of them. But there was one that was like, systematic review, and I'm like, yeah, that's it right there, because like England, Sweden, Finland, they've done the systematic review. They know that it's like it's a phase thing. It's a personality thing that you're expressing, and you have to kind of work through your feelings and work through why you're having these triggers and move on, grow. We can't take kids who are supposed to go through adolescence and grow into themselves and avoid that growth and derail it and turn them into something that they're not. And that kind of like affirmation, like scaffolding, that bubble of confirmation bias is just, how's a kid supposed to say, I don't really want to do this anymore, when everybody's cheering them on? And even as an adult, even as an autistic adult, I mean, how was I supposed to?
Well, what popped your bubble, your confirmation bias, your trans bubble?
Yeah, it was just poverty and not being able to keep up. Like eventually my wife and I, we were having problems with her family. We moved to Oregon for a little bit. COVID hit. And we couldn't see our kids. Like she has two kids and, I have one. And she, we had visitation set up and he was like, well, COVID. And so, they can't travel. And so we just, so we're just not going to see the kids. Like mom's just not going to see her two babies for, an up in the air amount of time. And so we started to talk, and then we talked to my ex, and she had just a little land, and she had like a truck camper, like on the back of her land. And so we were like, okay, we'll just kind of try to homestead it a little bit on the stupid little truck camper. So we lived like super poverty. We moved from Oregon. We brought all of our stuff out. She was still just as toxic as when I first met her, when we first got together. But she's just a narcissist with 60 cats. It's just, it got really difficult. But she was like holding our mail and letting it blow in the wind. It got goats to destroy all of our stuff. And so it was like, okay, so eventually we moved from there and moved out to
You got
Las
evicted
Vegas.
by goats?
Pretty much. Yeah. yeah, well, we bought the camper from her, and then she was like, well, now you guys got 30 days to leave. And I'm like, you kidding me, right?
Hmm.
So we sold off the camper and we took our money to Vegas and we were like, well, that's the only place that's open and we can maybe just find some job or something. Ended up doing DoorDash for a while and Uber Eats and it carried us through. We moved around a little bit. We tried to move back to California recently, but just didn't work out. It didn't work out. And so when we moved to that truck camper, that was the bubble pop. I couldn't get needles anymore. I didn't have any more alcohol swabs. I couldn't afford anything. I didn't have a job. I didn't have really any income coming in. And so we were just like drowning. And I was like, I'm not going to get facial feminization surgery. There's no more electrolysis like that I can go drive and get. Like the car barely runs. And yeah, we're just slammed with debt. It became it became my disability too because the ghosts were destroying everything. I was trying to build a fence. I hurt my back again because I wasn't on estrogen. My testosterone hadn't come back. My bones were weak. I had teeth breaking. Uh, my mind hasn't been the same since going through all of that. I felt like it destroyed my body and it left me in a vulnerable place where everybody thought I was a joke. Like I completely lost all my credibility as a smart, intelligent, person who knew what I was talking about. Now I was just this dope who went down this path, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I like really destroyed my whole everything. Like, and I didn't think I could have kids. We had been trying for like 6 years. We had nothing. So eventually, my testosterone came back, presumably. I mean, I had to test it. I haven't had health insurance in the past 3 years, but yeah, just trying to upkeep that whole thing is just ridiculous because you're just trying to keep a lie. And now it's gotten to the point where they want everybody around them to support that as well. And as much as like I even have like trans friends, like my stepbrother is trans. Like I've talked to Buck Angel recently. I have no hard feelings there. Like I feel like I could get along with trans people because I get it. Like, and I do feel like if there was more safeguards in place and more mental health screening, like, hey, if that's like the end of the road for you, like who am I to argue what you're doing with your adult body? Like I get it, but maybe we need to like be truthful about it about our biological sex. So trans women, maybe they should call themselves, biological men. And sure, call yourself a trans woman, but the reason we have trans is so we didn't need to have the word cis. It's like becoming almost like a slur. And so I've been I don't know. I can't support something that's hurting kids and taking away the experience of women from them and then trying to feed it back to them in some kind of poisonous little loop of like misinformation because
Hmm.
kids are confused. They don't know. They don't have all this knowledge. They don't have all this depth of information. They can't form a sophisticated argument. So it's like my wife's two kids. Like they there's no way they would do this. They've seen me go through it. They've seen me for years as the other mom, and now they're like, it makes sense that I stopped. They're like, oh, of course, they have no problem calling me by my name and referring to me by my actual pronouns. And I don't think my son would do it either. I mean, he kind of tried to get into a little bit of like the maybe I'm gay, maybe I'm a cross dresser thing, but it was like he's kind of growing out of that now. He wants to start his own life and do his own thing. So I just think kids don't need like exposed to this and taught it as if it's true, as if it's plausible to change your sex. Like a real big need to share that with everybody.
Hmm. So, where are you at now then? When did you start the desist, the testosterone, or the testosterone suppression and then the estrogen?
Well, so I let's see here. We moved 2020, so that's kind of I think when I stopped the estrogen. It was probably mid 2020 is when I just like there was no more estrogen, and I didn't like I still have some, but I don't have needles and stuff like that, and I didn't have the health insurance to go get them for free, and I wasn't going to pay for them because I didn't have the money for it. So yeah, mid 2020 is when I stopped the estrogen and the spironolactone, and then I just kind of just let my body do whatever it was going to do. And then in December of 2021, I was just like, we got COVID, and I was just like, man, if I was going to die, like, I don't want to die with like some lie on my shoulder. I don't want to die with like under the guise of some false identity. I want to die as me. Like I lived my life. Nobody. There was a whole period of time where I changed my name and did all this stuff. It's like the old me got forgotten. Everybody I knew from then got forgotten. Like everything kind of got scattered. Nobody could really find me. I didn't. Nobody knew my name. It's not like if my name popped up on their friend suggestion, it would have been like, oh, that's them. Like no, it was all different. Nobody would recognize me. So there was a need to live in my authentic self. And so in 2021, end of 2021, I started speaking out against it. I put up a YouTube video and I was like, you know what, actually, this doesn't feel right. Like, I don't think you can actually change your sex. And I think that they've really made some mistakes here. But it was a process. It was a process of a good, year and a half.
Well, there's a lot to process on the inside, and then there's a lot to speak about towards society, the gender culture, and also the medical side of things. I've spent a lot of time on this topic, and it's very big, and it goes in a lot more directions than just the hormone stuff and just the pronoun stuff. It's at the heart of our future.
Yeah.
Because maybe sex is kind of how we developed to interact with time, so it's just kind of like at the crux of civilization. It's right there. It's at the genesis.
Might be like a cornerstone of that whole thing. The keystone, actually. Yeah. True story. Yeah.
So as you develop, I know that there's a lot of internal work that you need to do, and then familial work that you need to do. How do you see your story or what you speak about change over the last, I guess, year? Then you've been speaking about it for 2 years. Then end of 2021. So about a year. Yeah.
Yeah. So after 21, there's a little bit of like, okay, well, I guess I can't change my body. I can't get rid of these breast implants. So I guess I'm non-binary. So I kind of tried to psychologically play around with that, but it doesn't really logically pan out. Like if you're going to reject the human binary, you're rejecting your humanity. That means you're an it, pretty much, logistically. So that doesn't work. And so it's just like after a while, I just like, okay, that's not going to work. So I was telling people, I think like, I guess I'm non-binary. But then over the past year, it started to crystallize into what it is now, which is just speaking adamantly just against it. Just saying the medical field has this wrong. Like they don't have this delineated correctly. They haven't done their due diligence and it's built on a house of cards and it's going to fall. And I'm telling you guys, it's going to fall. But that's been as a result of all the people who have reached out to me. So parents of kids who are going through this stuff, including old friends that I have from church who are like, yeah, my kid's trying to, like, they're pushing name and pronoun. And I just like, I don't know how I feel. And they want to push hormones. And I'm like, it's that heart wrenching, like, wow, this is affecting people really a lot. And that kind of added more fuel to the fire. It added more of like, wow, okay, this is a moral imperative. Instead of just being like sharing my story, like I need to stand up for people who don't know how to communicate the medical side of it. Because there's a perception disorder. It's anxiety. But it's OCD at its core. It's obsession over your sex, and it's to be compelled to have that lack of impulse, to be compelled to just keep funneling energy into it all the time. Everything, like whether your makeup is perfect, whether you're pulling hairs out of your face, or whether or not the bra's right, or whether or not you're buying a whole new wardrobe. It's a lot of obsession and compulsion. And some of that was just, I had to kind of piece it all together and say, no, my autism makes me fixate on this stuff. So maybe I should just fixate on helping other people not go down this path. Mm-hmm. Because they don't need to. Like, they're fine as they are. Like, learn to grow into your own skin. And for kids especially, it's like, no, adolescence, like that growing pain, that awkwardness, that's going to give you character later on in life. Like, if you can get through it, if you can grow through it, and you can see where it leads to, you're going to see the man that you're going to become, or you're going to see the woman that you're going to become. Like, have some faith in that. Have some faith in yourself. And don't think that you're wrong, born in the wrong body. It just felt like yeah, the main point was just to let people know that trying to be a transhumanist isn't really going to work long term for all of us. Because like chopping up our bodies and being blasé with like how we evolved and what our bodies are, how they're designed, what they're meant to do. If we interrupt that process in too many ways, we're going to actually interrupt something crucial about our humanity, and that will,
Hmm.
yeah, it's the crux, like you said, it's the crux of that whole thing, sexuality, how we appeal to each other and how we mannerize ourselves to each other, and who our right connection is, and that's important. And I think a thing a lot of people forget about is smell. Like a lot of people online, they get involved in all the pornography or the whatever, or they forget that smell is actually one of the first things that develop in utero, and it's like the first sense, and it's some of the earliest memories that we have. It's so important, and you don't get that online. So stuff that we relate to online isn't always true because there's some of those senses that are missing from that experience. We can't really base it on that, So like a lot of people have, they'll think that, oh, well, like they'll think they're gay or something like that, but maybe they'll go around a guy and then they'll be intimate and they'll be like, oh, maybe the smell isn't exactly what I was, and maybe I'm more detested by this than like it, or so,
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Hmm.
And even when they change themselves, like, oh, maybe if I start estrogen, maybe I'll enjoy my smell. Or, they don't realize some of the effects that this has on your overall psyche.
Hmm.
So there's like all kinds of, like you said, it goes in a lot of directions.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
There's a part of this topic that I haven't touched because I find it problematic from my point of view as a documentarian and interviewer, and it's called the trans widow, or specifically women whose long-term husband, partner, somewhere in middle age, goes breaks trans, right? And and then they have to, it just completely uproots the entire network, all the assumptions that marriage was based on. And then it also, with the kids and all this stuff. And so they call themselves trans widows. I don't know how to navigate an interview with one person about a broken relationship. That seems like way too difficult for me to ethically contain within a one-on-one conversation. And I bring that up as preface to asking not about your relationship, but if you've thought about the impacts that transition has on relationships, and if you've ever thought about speaking to that, and how your relationship with your wife has navigated gender and the qualities of resilience and the negotiations that you guys had to enter into. I think that would be a really good thing for certain people to hear. It sounds like you probably have some insight into that.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a great point to bring up. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say very clearly with my second marriage, when I was going through all of that stuff, mom had died and everything, I was trying to come out by and take estrogen pills because I wanted to be more feminized. I didn't have access to hormones or anything. So those birth control pills, that's all I could get a hold of. Um, yeah, she did not take the news well. And I could see why they would call themselves trans widows. Because yeah, she kept saying like, it's like this other part of you died, but it was more like in that relationship, I think it undermines the trust completely. Like, okay, you think you know this person, then this person is not who you thought they were. But I have two different experiences with that. So yeah, with my second wife, she wasn't into it, and then we broke up kind of off and on. And I think she was always kind of hoping I would kind of come back to being a man. Um,
Hmm.
but at the time, I just there was no way. And then I wasn't super happy about her lack of understanding of my journey and where I needed to go, the things I needed to explore and work out for myself. Like I felt kind of like, well, you've trusted me so far, like you can't trust me through this. And from her perspective, it's like, I trusted you so far. How can you do this?
Hmm.
But then there's my wife now, Grace, who she also tried testosterone for. She tried to kind of FTM it a little bit for like 6 months, and started losing a little bit of hair, and weight started changing, and the hair growth, and she was like within 6 months, she was like, this isn't really, no, this isn't a happiness thing. This isn't what I was signed up for. This isn't really what I want. But again, no real comorbidity screening, no psychotherapy, nothing like that. It's just like, okay, here you go. So she's been through it too, a little bit during ours. So the first marriage, yeah, I didn't really, it just broke it up. Um, the conversations we had were, I think it was like, we have all this history, but I just can't get over this thing of you trying to be a woman. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make sense. Um, but with my wife now, when we met, I was a woman, or I was a trans woman. So, and she didn't really know if I was, biologically male or biologically female. She wasn't sure, and she'd always been bisexual, so she didn't really care. She just saw kind of my energy and the stuff I was posting, and we got along, and I was helping her through one of her relationships that ended up being really toxic, where she was, I think, 12 weeks pregnant or 16 weeks pregnant, and then he like raped her and folded her in half and killed the baby, and then she couldn't pass the baby and went to multiple places, started to get septic, and like, it was these kind of experiences. I was like, well, this, like, I can't call myself a woman. Like, I haven't been through that. Like, I can't even, I'm not even capable of going through that. Like, that's insane. But when I decided that this wasn't really working, my wife now, she saw me through the process a little bit, and I do think that it comes out coming different because I was desisting. I was being my authentic, real self. This is who I really am, instead of like trying to create an illusion, which is why the second marriage ultimately failed. But there were other problems in that relationship. I don't think it necessarily would have lasted forever,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm happier now. So it's like, I can see where things are. I'm happier now. It's fine.
Hmm.
But looking back, it was a lot of stress and trauma to go through, and there's a lot of misdirection and bad relationships, a lot of arguments.
Yeah. Yeah, I just I do understand. Again, it would be really difficult for me to interview a trans widow because I'm sure that transition could be used to cover up multiple problems from a multiple different directions. So you're looking at the ending of a relationship. There's not just one thing that's going on there. But I do understand like the vibe. Like, if a woman signs up to a heterosexual relationship, does she become a lesbian if the man transitions? And like, how does her identity, and this is not a question to you, I'm just wondering out loud, how does the woman's or the partner's identity have to rearrange itself to remap the whole story in the head in a way? Unless you just make gender something completely non-binary and you water down gender so it doesn't really mean anything.
Right. Where it's more like fashion instead of sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my observations, as far as I can tell, like, my second wife, she after we broke up, she spent, I think, what it felt like to me was she was trying to reclaim her power as a woman. She went out and dated somebody else, and she went and hung out with her family and furthered her career, like, just gung ho. Like, I feel like it was a lot of like, well, fuck this, I'm out. Like, and I'm gonna go, like, I'm not gonna be burdened down by this identity change that you're trying to put me into, and this reputational change that I would have to associate with. I think it was, I think she was trying to run away from that. She was trying to distance herself from it.
Mm-hmm.
Rightly so. I felt like, looking back, like, I was kind of off the rails, and there wasn't any doctors to tell me, hey, like, slow down.
So you sound very intelligent, like you could do a lot of really good writing. Like, I hear a organizational way of, and you have great vocabulary too. You know all these terms. Syntoptic. What was the one? Egosyntoptic?
Oh, egosyntonic.
Syntonic. You got some great little singers. Do you write? How do you share what you need to share? How is the moral imperative that you feel compelled by manifesting in the world? In what direction are you taking it?
Well, that moral imperative is a goal that I'm currently trying to reach. And I say that it's a goal because I'm definitely not meeting my goal. I have high expectations for myself, and I don't meet them. But that's because when I went through college, when I went through all my physics and chemistry, and I was doing like biopsychology, which was a fascinating course. Um, this I was doing a lot of writing, so I was doing a lot of like research papers, writing papers, and so I had tons of citations and sources, and so I do have a lot of experience writing. Nowadays, it's mostly just like, can I, with my disability, make enough money running around town delivering these little orders to just keep our place so that way our baby has a home to come to.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
become
Yeah.
more of like, okay, I'm fighting the poverty thing again, but
Hmm.
there's this goal. There's this goal of being able to, yes, write this all out, to put the citations in there, to get the stuff from Medscape and the DSM and from these psychological studies and these books, these textbooks that have all these wealth about information, and actually glue it all together for them. Because if they're not going to do it with a systematic review and do it on their own, like nobody's doing it. Like there's some people who are talking about it, yeah, and they're starting to chip at the edges, but I feel like yeah, there's the goal is to definitely change the narrative, to reorganize the DSM somehow, so that way it makes sense.
Hmm.
Because if you're just gonna sort of arbitrarily choose a bunch of signs and symptoms off a list, I mean, you could choose some of them off OCD or some of them off anxiety or some of them off depression, and depending on how you word the questions, the treatments might be the same for all three of them. It just depends on the doctor, depends on who's practicing that day. So I think we need a little bit more time, like digging into that. One of the things I've been sort of floating around is we need to apply AI to the DSM somehow,
Hmm.
to sort of all these statistics and coalesce them in a more natural manner. So maybe someday we'll get.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I always thought it was a fascinating way because it seems like the statistics are all kind of leaning on how the questions are asked. As real as the biological stuff, like the PET MRIs that we see and the information that we get from that. I think we need to synthesize that more. But
Yeah,
writing
it's
about it,
interesting.
yeah, it's definitely a goal.
Yeah.
Right now, I just do TikToks and I
Okay.
write a little bit when I can, but
Yeah.
baby's due in 2 weeks, so it's
Two
been
weeks,
slowly
man.
and slowly.
Wow.
And she's a big baby.
Wow.
She's already 8 pounds, and the doctor's like, "Okay, we're gonna do a week early." And big baby, and we're just
Oh,
like,
wow.
"Oh boy, here we go." But I'm excited. This will be my first baby girl, so
Huh. That's a blessing.
and yeah, I don't. It's a blessing. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it is. And after what 7 years of being sterile, like what a trip! What a trip!
It's
So we're
Abrahamic.
excited. Yeah,
Isaac
that's
was
what my wife's.
turning into a woman. You had to sacrifice yourself as a woman in order to.
I'd say it was a good trade. It was a really good trade,
Hmm.
definitely.
Hmm.
And my wife's happy too. She's having a really hard pregnancy, but
Yeah.
she's happy, and we're both just trying to get through it. So financially, yeah, that's been the thing. So I wrote out my 45,000 word, sort of rough draft of my biography. I don't have enough money to like put it out on Kindle, but I'm like, okay, at least this is a start. Get it going. I've been putting it out there and sort of sent it to my family and sent it to everybody. Like, I know you guys don't talk to me and everything, but just here's everything that you missed in my life.
Hmm.
So that way everybody knows. And so now I've gotten some good response. I've had reconnected with a couple of family members in a sporadic way, but
Hmm.
I'll take it. I'll take healing as best as it can come. But there's still some family members that are like really distant and they don't really like know what to think about me right now. They're like, I don't really know what's going on with Chris, but
Hmm.
we'll just wait and see on the sidelines. All right, as long as you guys are watching a little bit,
Yeah.
that's okay. As long as I'm saying the right things that I need to be saying.
How how can people connect with you or follow you? Plug your
So yeah,
socials.
most of my stuff is Chris B. Ostrowski, and that's on TikTok, Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. And then I also have the same handle on Cash App and Venmo for people who want to send in on that stuff. And my GoFundMe as well. But yeah, just look up my name, Chris Ostrowski. It's not too many Ostrowski, but you know, but I do still have my name as my transgender name legally. I still have to get that changed, and that's been kind of a stress because I have to get a therapy letter to say that I'm a man, so that way I can go change it with the federal. And well, then I have to go. I have to get the therapy letter, then I have to get a court order, for my name and gender change. Then I have to go to the Social Security Administration and then file it with them to get my Social Security changed. And then I can go to the DMV and get that. And it's been like, so what name do I put on the baby's certificate?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like,
I wish I could get the breast removed. I called my old doctor, my old surgeon in Beverly Hills, who was contracted with Medi-Cal, because this was all paid for by state health insurance in California. Yeah. And he was like, well, it'll be $8,000 to remove the breasts, and that's just to get rid of the implants in the capsule. But if you want your nipples changed and you have your male chest reconstructed, that'll be more. Yeah. So I'm like, thanks a lot, dude. Appreciate it.
Oh, man.
Bye.
You can't like,
so
is there like a pill you can take where the silicone just kind of like sweats out or something?
No. And on the dangerous end, I've thought about just piercing it with an 18-gauge needle and just draining them. But I know that'll just lead to a lot of calcification and complications if they got infected.
And then you have these little flippy floppies going around.
I know. I'm going to have those anyways, probably. I haven't been able to take my shirt off at a beach for a long time. I don't think it's going to be anytime soon.
I'm so sorry, dude.
It's terrible. I got a nice pool, too. It's really awful. The last time I went to a pool, they were like, does that guy have breasts? What's going on? It was like some 17-year-olds. I'm like, I don't belong here. I don't be here. I'm leaving.
Oh, no.
So I just go outside to grill on the grill and make food, and I come back in the house. It's caused a lot of agoraphobia, I'll tell you that.
Oh, avoidance of groups?
Yeah. Avoidance of groups, avoidance of people. When I was transitioning, I isolated for like a whole year. And now I just like, I'm a little better now because I'm confident about it. I know what happened. I know where I'm at. If somebody confronts me about it or has something to say, I have a lot to say about it too.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like it works in my favor right now.
I just spoke with Casey Miller, who is a female to male to female detransitioner who posted early in October about her male pattern baldness that affected her post-testosterone, and then that blew up and stuff. But she's kind of stuck in this uncanny valley. She's like, well, I'm not going to be a woman again. There's no way like I'm going to be a woman again. Yeah, I am a woman, but nobody's going to see me that the testosterone has really heavily masculinized her. So it's just this odd and uncanny valley. Like that is like kind of the true detrans or non-binary kind of thing. It's like how does society navigate that situation with bathrooms and stuff like that? Like does Casey go, or does the female go in the male bathroom because they pass?
That's been interesting, yeah. Because like I know, like Buck Angel was saying, like been passing as male for so long that it would make women uncomfortable to be in the women's restroom.
Yeah.
And I that's kind of part of the issue, right? Like we want to make sure that women like have a safe space away from men. There's no male genitalia where they can't get assaulted by somebody who gets pregnant, basically. And so I know Buck uses like the male restroom and stuff like that. And my solution throughout all this has been like, why don't we just have a third restroom or find a single person stall? I mean, because that's mostly what I was doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like if I were to go to my surgeon and pay him like $12,000 or $20,000 to get my male chest reconstructed, I'm still going to look female to male at that point because I'm going to have a huge scar. I'm going to have like differently looking nipples, and it's not going to look like a true male chest. So yeah, there's damage, and detransitioners are now almost like the new versions of like genital mutilation that need to be. We need to focus our techniques on recovery and restoration instead of on changing something that's already natural to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see if you guys get a Veterans Day at some point.
Right. Detransitioners Day, they got a day for everything now.
They do. Well, trans, they have like 39 days or something like that. They have a day of visibility, invisibility, forgetfulness, trans restitution hour. They have the month they took over Pride. I guess they have to share it with the intersex people now, but the intersex people don't want to have anything to do with it.
Right. Well, I can't believe that. That's so many days.
There's a lot of days. But Chris, thank you so much for reaching out and coming on and sharing your story. Very
thank you.
Powerful, insightful stuff. I will link all of your contact in the description for people to follow you and read up on your story. And help you out if they feel so moved. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me. It's been good to talk, and I've been looking forward to meeting you for a while.
Well, here we are.
Yeah.